Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Digital History. Maybe you can hear outside at 7:30 on the street. People are banging pots. We're coming to the end of May 2020. Today we're going to be talking about working with the document object model, or the DOM, in JavaScript. And this is super important topic because it's this set of methods in JavaScript that allows us to actually transform web pages in the way that we want to. So this is why we're learning JavaScript. Some of what I say may feel puzzling until you actually do it. So I'm going to encourage you once again to try to stop along the way and just do what I'm doing. And in fact, I'll do that myself from time to time. Everything in an HTML document can be manipulated through the so-called document object model, which is an internal representation of the web page that the browser has, and which works into which the JavaScript engine has access, I guess I mean to say. What we have here, this image, is a representation of the kind of base elements of the document object model, and you can see that the model is of a branching tree with parent elements, each of which contain descendants, children, grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and so forth. You'll notice there's the root, an element, another element, and then inside an element often a text node, which is the text that is contained inside that element. When you use the inspector in your DevTools, you're kind of given an indication of where you are in that tree, and you can see it here in this little red rectangle, which shows you that if you clicked on this TD, it has the characteristic name, the class name. It has the ID Steve Biko. It's in a TD. It's in a TR with the ID Steve Biko, which is itself in the T body, inside a table, inside a div, and inside something else as well, inside a card. We can even kind of do that right now. Look at the structure of this web page that we're in right now. So if I click on this header, we see that it's an H3 inside a section, which is inside another section, which is inside a div, which is inside another div, which is inside the body. Yeah, this is a super important tool, and you're going to be using it to make sure that your functions do the work that they're supposed to do. There are, for everything that we're learning to do today, there are sort of two ways to do it. One, and in some ways the better way to do it, is to use the native built-in features of the JavaScript language. But for a long time, this is becoming a little bit less common now. Many people instead used a set of convenience functions that are in a very widely used library called jQuery. The two methods are slightly different from one another. You can do almost everything that you can do in jQuery with vanilla JavaScript, but it tends to be just a little bit clunkier to do it in vanilla JavaScript. So for the purposes of this class, we're using jQuery to do the assignments. I sometimes wonder if that's the best way to do it, but it's just a little bit easier to learn. So, for instance, if you want to find an element with vanilla JavaScript, you can use the command document.querySelector with the search string in your pardon me, that you're looking for. Um, that will return the first one that's found in the document tree, and query selector all will return a list of all the matching elements that are found in the tree. In jQuery, you can write it a little bit more concisely. You use the sort of magic $ variable, which when jQuery is loaded means just means jQuery. It's shorthand for jQuery. And you would search for the string to find the relevant elements. In order for jQuery to work, the library has to be invoked, has to be made part of the page. And that will be done with a script tag, which loads jQuery from its from the CDN, from a remote location. So it's your choice. You're perfectly welcome to use vanilla JavaScript, and in some ways I kind of don't think it's a bad idea to learn it. It's just a little bit trickier, and because it's a little bit trickier, it's a little harder to explain. And so I use jQuery instead because I find that it's just a little bit easier to explain. So let's maybe just do a quick example here. Sorry. So we don't have jQuery loaded in this page. Let's just find, let's find the first H1 element in the page, and there it is returned to us, and it's returned as an HTML element object, which has lots and lots of properties. Let's scroll down to the point where we can see the text. Where's the text? There's the text content, yes. So the first one to be found, the first H1 element, is the title of this presentation, which is 0701 JavaScript in the DOM, and so actually here I can just ask for the text content directly, and it'll be given to me. Once we have the elements, we can operate on them if we want to. For instance, if you want to change the value of the text, here, let's do something just kind of fun here. So this is just cheat sheet. We'll find it. I believe that's an H3. And that gives us a node list, which is kind of an array-like. Maybe it's an H2. It's probably going to be an H2. Hold on. A little bit hard to identify. So we'll do it this way. Hold on. We'll just set that equal. Then we'll set a new variable, and then we'll loop through. Oops. If so, h.text content equals so here what I'm going to do, I want to change the text of cheat sheet. So I'm going to first get all the H2s, and then I'm going to loop through the H2s and try to find the one that has the text content of cheat sheet, and then I'm going to change that to something else. And I just want to show you what I want is to show you what that looks like. Oops. Ta-da! And there I changed it. So you can take a look at that code and see if it makes sense to you. Maybe stop and you can try and work on it in your own copy of the presentation and so forth. So that's changing the text value. You can similarly change what's inside the element that you've chosen. So for instance, you can add new elements to an element directly by setting the HTML. And you can see the way to do it in jQuery over here and in vanilla JavaScript over here. You can also append a new element to an element. So suppose you have, say, a table that has a bunch of children. Those children are TRs. You can add a whole new TR element if you want to here. And you can similarly remove a node from the page. So I don't know if I can get back to what I had before. Let's just look at our that parent mode that remove child, right? So I don't usually use it in JavaScript. So let's just see if we did this right. It's the kind of mistake I make all the time. That parent to remove child. Oh, this no longer equals dumb cheat sheet, so we gotta change this to dumb cheat sheet. Ta-da! And now we just got rid of that header altogether. Okay. So often something we want to do in jQuery is change some CSS on a selector, on an element of some kind. And here we see how we do that. The property that we're trying to, or the method that we're trying to access is the CSS method. And it takes two parameters, the name of a property and the new value. So we can kind of do that kind of work here. So what we see here is a web page that you will build. Looks a little funny when for some reason. But that you will build in the assignment. It has, as we can see here, an H1, I believe. Yep. So we go to the console and we can change the color of the text so we'll first select the H1, and then we'll use the CSS to change it. And I find this looks all right in this context. So you can see us doing that. You can change the background color. I only know so many color names. That would be a bad idea. Maybe don't do that anymore. You can unset the rule that you just given by passing it back a set of empty empty quotation marks. So yeah, that's CSS, and I'll say a little bit more about selectors in a minute. I already showed you how to change the text content, so so maybe we will just change the text content here. So instead of text content, the way it says it in the way you write it in vanilla JavaScript, in jQuery we just say text. Text, we'll change the text to some of the leaders by name. Right, so maybe that's a little bit more correct, because there's hardly some comprehensive table of all the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement. Yeah, so we can either get the existing text by not passing a parameter, or we can set a new value by passing a parameter, a string as a parameter. And similarly, you can change the full inner HTML by passing text there, or you can use the command HTML. Oops. And this is how you can append an element to an existing element. So it would be weird with an H1 to append a paragraph. That doesn't really work, but we might want to append a span. So something like, so we'll just, this is like a little correction. And there we just appended some text to it. There are lots more jQuery commands. This is just a tiny, tiny, tiny little fraction of them. So the first thing I want to, I don't really have a slide for this. I should have said something about this. Something that you need to understand is that when you call the jQuery function using the $, you pass it a parameter. That parameter is in general a string. It can also be a node object, but it's in general a string when we do it, when we start it at least. And that string can be any valid CSS selector. So you already know a lot of selectors from CSS. You know an element selector. So I've only been doing here element selectors, but you also know class selectors, you know ID selectors, you know descendant selectors, you know child selectors. So any of those are valid parameters to pass to jQuery and will give you decent results. When we run jQuery here, let's make this a little bit more obvious. We'll do it right here. So maybe that's not right. Anyway, I'll just do TD. So when we run jQuery, we will get something that looks a lot like the list. And here we see it in the inspector. It has numbered elements, but in fact, it's not actually a list. It's an object. It's another kind. It's not an array. It's an object with enumerable properties. And because of that, you can use the of in the for of loop to iterate over the object, the values, the elements that have been returned by a jQuery function call. Each of the elements that's returned is actually like a regular JavaScript HTML element, and that means that if you want to access them directly, you can use the native JavaScript functions or methods on that element. But if you want to continue to use the jQuery things that you've gotten used to, you have to wrap it again in the $ function. So, so why don't I say, let's look at the first of these. I think this is going to be so, and then let's look at the text content of the TD that we found. It's Steve Biko. It's right here. So I'm going to set okay, so we have Steve. So we have a new variable Steve, which has been set equal to the element that contains Steve Biko's name right here. And we can look at that element. It's a TD element. It has tons of properties, including the native JavaScript text content. So if I want to set the text content, I can do steve.textContent equals Steve Biko. Pretty cool. So I should probably use quotation marks. And we can see we've changed the content there. If I want to, but I've changed the content there using the native JavaScript method. If I want to change it using jQuery, I'm going to have to wrap Steve again in a jQuery call. So I'll do it like this. Oops, I did it the wrong way. I hope I didn't screw us up. No. So I did that. So you can see it looks pretty similar, but not identical. And in some ways, it's a little bit more intuitive to use the equal sign to set the text content, but it's a little bit easier to write actually in jQuery. So yeah, to use jQuery methods on an element that is a result of a jQuery call, you have to wrap that element back in jQuery. That can be a little bit tricky and confusing. Often you're going to want to loop over an object, and you saw me do that right at the beginning. This is the way that you would do it with jQuery. We can do it right here with jQuery because jQuery is loaded on this page. So I'm omitting the let here, which is very bad form when I define new variables, but JavaScript lets you get away with it. And the reason I omit it when I'm working in this console is that if I rerun my code over and over again, the console will give me an error because of the redeclaration of let. So anyway, so all cells equals, so let's create a variable, and in that variable put the jQuery response that gathers up all of the TD elements in this table. And now I can do a for loop. Why don't we write const cell? Maybe it's a little less confusing if I wrote let. So now what I'm going to do here is iterate across the cells and change the text content of all of them. Oops. Oh, whoops, sorry. Those of you who are listening, maybe. That would have been the way to do it. Yeah. Okay, so there's the kind of working example. Take a look at that code and see if you can reproduce it and make sense of it. So yeah, so that's maybe one way to loop. This is another way to loop to do something with each of the matching elements in a jQuery call. So what we can do is use the jQuery.each method, which will run a function on using each of the elements. And that function is what's called a callback function. It is, take a look at it, look at the syntax. It's passed as a parameter, as the only parameter to the each method. So we pass in a parameter, and the parameter that we pass is itself a function. It's a function that gets one, that it gets passed one parameter, which is the index, the place in the array-like structure, and it also gets a new version of this. Within this context, this is that element. So let's just take a quick look and see what happens when we try to do this on a real web page. I think we don't have td.name in this page. And you can see we've got this stuff logged to the console. Here's the content of cell number 0 to 39, so there are 40 cells total. Maybe a little bit easier to read without the kind of extraneous content that we added. Here's the content of cell number 0, Steve Biko. Here's the content of cell number 1, 1946. So I hope that that is a little bit clear. It may feel hard. And the really hard part is wrapping your head around the idea that a function can be a parameter. Remember I told you when I introduced functions a while back that a function is a variable. And just as you can pass a variable as a parameter to another function, you can pass a function. And that pattern, that programming pattern, is extremely common in JavaScript, the use of so-called callback functions. And that can make code a little bit tricky to read. In terms of the scope of what you're expected to learn in this class, you may not ever find yourself needing to really write callback functions. But if you play around with it and try to do it, after you get comfortable, you will know a lot more than you did before you were comfortable. So it can be, I think, a worthwhile exercise to think about how you might write some of the code that we're writing in a way that uses callback functions. And this link right here to CodeBurst is really, really good. So I think this is my final slide. Some takeaways for us in terms of working with the DOM and JavaScript. First, there's a lot going on out there. This is a big, big world of programming. It's one of the most popular programming languages in the world, and there are many thousands of complex libraries, some of which are very widely used. Things are changing all the time, so it's not possible for me to convey to you some kind of comprehensive picture of the JavaScript landscape or some mastery of JavaScript as a whole. There are many complex concepts that are widely deployed in JavaScript, but if you go slowly, you can figure it out. And what I just said to you in this lecture, some of it may feel somewhat opaque for various reasons, either because it's kind of a crappy lecture or just because it's too much information. But if you work at it and move slowly, do not move too fast, then you will be amazed at the progress you can make in just a few weeks. For everything that you do, the key thing that you must understand is that the DOM is a structure of HTML elements, and those elements can be created, destroyed, and transformed. And jQuery is one way to do it, then vanilla or native JavaScript methods are another way to do it. No matter what you choose, learn to become familiar with your tools and practice manipulating the DOM. You can do it in your assignment, but you can also do it like on almost any web page. Certainly any web page that has jQuery enabled if you're using jQuery methods. And just work in the dev tools to change some web content. And I think that can be kind of fun and a cool thing to learn. Okay, enjoy. See you in class sometime soon.